Good morning FBC Kids families. It's great to see you on this sunny Sunday morning. My name is Simon. I'm the Youth and Children's Pastor here at FBC and we've got a very exciting game for you this morning. Very similar to last week, but it involves water. This is Redhead. Some of you kids may know it, some of you parents don't know it, but very simply it's like a roulette game. It has got 8 stops and very simply you pull one out at a time. But one of them, only one of them, releases water all the way down the back of the person we volunteer to have the hat on. Right, in the towel to dry your face. As simple as that. So all you need to do this morning, before we get on with it, we need you, as always, to gather in the family. Gather in, whether they're upstairs, whether they're in the kitchen, whether they're in the bathroom, wherever they are. Shout them in, call them in, because this is a game what you will love to see. I'll give you a few seconds, come on. Don't just sit back, I know it's hot, but you can do it. Go on, a few more seconds. And let's begin. Okay, you have to choose who is going to get wet, Katie or Ellie. If you are correct, you stay standing. If you are incorrect, you take a seat. And we're going to see who is still standing after the 5 rounds. As simple as that. So choose Katie or Ellie. Okay, round 1 FBC Kids families. Is it going to be Ellie or is it going to be Katie? Simple as that. You need to choose whether it's going to be Ellie getting wet or Katie getting wet. If you choose the correct person, you stay standing. If you choose the person who doesn't get wet, you sit down. So let's go to Ellie. Here we go. First one coming out. She is right. Okay, Katie. Who chose Katie? Let's go. Round 2. Let's go. There's 8 in total. Let's take the next one out. 3. That's still dry. Let's spin it again. It's like roulette, isn't it? 4. Ah! Okay. Round 1. Right. Okay, we've had a mini heat wave this week, haven't we? It has been so hot. How have you cooled off? Have you got example a swimming pool in the back garden? Or have you had loads of ice creams? Or have you had a water fight? We would love again for you to tell us what you've been up to cool down during this really hot time we've had this week. Round 2. Okay, is it going to be Ellie or is it going to be Katie? Let's start with Katie this time, shall we? Let's spin it around. Pull one out. It's not fixed, by the way. You're safe. Ellie, spin around. That one. She's safe. Round 3. That's good. Round 4. I'm gonna go with that one, I reckon. Round 5. Ooh.
I can tell.
My favourite season is the summer. I love the heat. I love just being out in the sun. What's your favourite season? Do you like winter, where it's cold, summer, where it's really hot, or the 2 in between sort of seasons? Tell us again what your favourite season is. Okay, round 3. Is it going to be Ellie or is it going to be Katie? Katie's looking a little bit wet, as you can see, but she's still smiling. Let's start with Ellie then. Here we go. For the first one out. Ah, the first one!
I didn't want to go, so I thought she would get one. Me too, I didn't want to go.
Okay, what is your favourite ice cream? So many around. I love ice cream, but I think my favourite is one that's been around for years. Even your parents will know about it. It's called Feast. I love Feast when it's sort of softish on the outside and solid chocolate on the inside. Again, tell us what your favourite ice cream is. Round 4. Here we go. Katie or Ellie? Let's see how we do. And spin it around.
Please don't choose it.
No fixing happening.
Dry.
Number
Yes.
1, dry. Number 2.
Oh my god. Yes! Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Went all the way down to my dress.
Round 5. So far, Kate has got wet twice. Ed has got wet twice. Who are you going to choose? Who's going to get the 3 and who's going to get the 2? So hopefully you're still in it. Hopefully you're still standing. If you're sitting, yeah, why not? Stand up and let's have a round where everybody is in, and we need to decide whether Kate is going to get wet or whether Ed is going to get wet. Here we go. Round 5, the final round. It's full to the top, this one, so they will get soaked. Here we go. Let's start with Katie, the oldest. Spinning around and boom!
She's dry.
She's dry.
When you want to get wet, she could get dry as well.
She could. Round 2. There you go. The tension. Oh, I can feel the tension. Can you,
I
Ellie?
can feel it's coming.
You can feel it's coming. Round 3.
Am I safe? Yeah.
You're safe. Oh, I can't cope. The pressure's on.
I know what one it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm stuck. What's going to happen? Round
Oh
4.
my gosh. Oh, that's freezing.
There we go, the final. It was Ellie. Did you choose Ellie? If you did, congratulations. Okay, thank you for playing this amazing wet game with us this morning. Hopefully you enjoyed it. The girls will recover eventually, I promise you. If you want to see some more cool kids stuff, join us early again next week for more games. Who knows what it will be next week? Baked beans, custard, maybe throw your ideas forward. We would love to hear what sort of games we can do during this time. So again, have a great week and enjoy FBC Live.
I bet you've Googled lots of questions this year. Where can I get a face mask? How do I avoid the virus? When will a vaccine be available? What is the R number? But there's one question we're all thinking, even if we've not actually Googled it. Why doesn't God do something to stop this virus and the suffering it's causing? If God exists, and I know for many of you that's still a big if, why does He allow sickness and death on this scale? Why doesn't God do something? It's one of Faith's big questions that we're going to reflect on today. I certainly don't have all the answers, but by the end you'll discover that God has done something radical for our suffering world. Over the past months, we've heard the statistics, studied the graphs, and watched in horror as the virus affects the vulnerable and spreads to less developed countries where there's no ICU. If God created this world, then why does He appear to stand back and watch His creation suffer? You may have lost someone or suffered yourself, and you're wrestling right now with this question. I've been there. When I lost my younger sister to cancer, I didn't realise how blessed I was to be able to hold her hand in her final days. If you're going through an unbearable situation, intensified by social restrictions, then it's likely all too raw at the moment, too painful, too soon for me to start offering theories. But it is worth our while looking at some ancient wisdom that still speaks to us today. What Jesus said about a suffering world. The remarkable man who lived 2 millennia ago, the man who claimed to be God. Does He have an answer to our question that will help us make sense of this? Jesus was born into a culture with high levels of sickness and suffering. In His day, many assumed that when something bad happened to you, it was judgment from God. You deserved it. So people asked Jesus directly what He thought. Does disaster or sickness always happen to the bad guy? Or do bad things happen to good people? A historian called Luke records the conversation Jesus had with some followers about a local disaster. A tower collapsed, 18 people were killed, an accident, a tragedy. It was one of those things that caused people to ask that question, why? And we ask the same question today, why? What have I done to deserve this? In Jesus' time, they asked why, because they assumed they did deserve it. Well, Jesus pushed back against that assumption. He clarified that the accident wasn't judgment by God for any particular crime. The victims were no worse than other people. In our broken world, bad things happen to good people. But Jesus did go on to warn his questioners. The disaster should be a wake-up call for everyone. He said, unless you turn to God, you too will die. Well, what did he mean by that? The people of Jerusalem, though outwardly religious, were mostly ignoring God, living selfishly, and God wasn't fooled by their hypocrisy. Jesus warned that their self-centered choices would lead to death in the end. Is there a way out of that? Hold that thought for a bit, and we'll come back to it. So could today's pandemic be judgment from God on a world troubled by injustice, corruption, and greed? I don't think God has sent this pandemic to teach us a lesson, but God has allowed it to happen. And perhaps, as Jesus said, it could be a warning for us, a wake-up call to the reality of our own mortality, to consider life beyond death, to ask ourselves, where will I spend eternity? It may be our opportunity to turn towards God instead of avoiding him. Like the people of Jesus' day, we get on with our lives, often indifferent to God and to the needs of others. So the pandemic may be a wake-up call for a world which is heading in the wrong direction. Did Jesus say anything helpful about sickness? Jesus' best mate John records someone asking Jesus if a man they were walking past was blind from birth because of his parents' crimes or his own crimes. They assumed the blindness was judgment from God. Jesus clarified that his disability was not caused by anyone's wrong behaviour. What a relief for him and his parents. No guilt to bear. And there was also no excuse for others not to have compassion on the sightless man. It wasn't his fault. But Jesus actually said very little about suffering and sickness in our world. I wonder if that surprises you. He didn't point out to his questioners that much suffering is caused by humans, by our exercise of free will, our choices that cause damage to ourselves, each other, and to creation. COVID-19 may have originated from abuse of wild animals, and we've watched how indifference, pride, arrogance, and greed have helped it spread. Humans are at least partly culpable for much of the suffering in the world today. Jesus didn't point out to them that if God stepped in to stop every evil in the world, he would have to stop you and me doing what we like, because we get it wrong all the time. We're part of our broken world. Jesus didn't get into that theological debate. You and I ask why God doesn't do something about suffering, and Jesus said very little about it. Why is that? Doesn't he care? I think it's because instead of just talking about it, he took action. The blind man was still sitting there while people asked their philosophical question. He must have cringed when they suggested his loss of sight was deserved. Perhaps he believed it himself, wondering what it was he did to deserve it. Have you ever found yourself asking the same question? In John chapter 9, you can read the story. Jesus spat in the ground, made some mud, put it on the man's eyes before sending him to a pool to wash. Well, surely he must have tried washing before, but there was something about Jesus that made the man stumble off, hardly daring to hope. He washed, and for the first time in his life, he could see. To the blind man, Jesus gave the gift of sight, and it wasn't a one-off. He healed people with skin diseases, bleeding, paralysis, spine deformities, and deafness. Once, when he heard the only son of a widow had died, he told the grieving woman not to weep. He touched the coffin. He told the young man to get up. And there was shock and joy when he did. Compassion for suffering people shaped Jesus' life on earth. Time after time, this man who claimed to be God reached out to the sick and sorrowing. He knew loss and grief himself. When his friend Lazarus died, he wept at the graveside. Jesus, claiming to be both God and man, in his life powerfully demonstrated compassion for a suffering world. He brought healing wherever he could to whoever crossed his path, but he was limited as a human being to that generation in that location. It's in his death that we most clearly see God doing something about suffering for all people in all ages. In fact, that's why Jesus came, to put an end to evil and its painful consequences once and for all. Christianity is the only religion where God himself, in the human body of Jesus, entered our suffering and experienced our pain. We can't accuse him of being remote or indifferent. In his last days, Jesus experienced rejection, injustice, loneliness, humiliation, torture, and an excruciating public execution. God, in the body of his Son, entered our world of flesh and blood and endured the worst that mankind could inflict. So whatever questions you might have about sickness and suffering, you can't say that God doesn't care about it. He cared so deeply that he entered our world of pain to rescue us from it. On the cross of execution, Jesus dealt with the corruption of the world, everything from little white lies and gossip to genocide. And he dealt with all the pain that has resulted from it over the centuries. He took that judgment of death that we deserve, that he warned us about. Remember that warning from earlier? He took that judgment on himself. And then, 3 days later, you can read the eyewitness reports in the New Testament part of our Bible. A supernatural power was released that will one day renew the entire universe. Death was defeated, and Jesus' corpse was raised to life. So this is the ultimate answer to sickness and suffering. Like Jesus, everyone who believes in him will receive a new body in a new earth that will not be ruined by the effects of evil, a new body that will not succumb to disease or the aging process. Those who turn to God, who listen to that warning Jesus gave, will avoid that final judgment of death. We find out about this new heaven and new earth in the last book in the Bible called Revelation, written by John after a vision. This new creation is a place of beauty and light, men and women at home with God, who's no longer hidden but revealed in all his shining brilliance. And there's a promise. God will wipe every tear from our eyes. Whatever you and I have been through, there will be no more death, crying, pain, and sickness. Gone. God has promised to step in one day, stop the earthly clock, and put an end to all evil and suffering. So there is hope for us all. God's plan is in place. Jesus has done all that is needed. We ask the question, why doesn't God do something about sickness and suffering? He has done something, and he is doing something. He came himself to bring healing while he lived as a man. He understands our pain and grief. He's present with us in the hospital ward, the ICU, and at the graveside. By suffering himself, he made it possible for us to live forever, free from sorrow, in a new world. I don't have all the answers, but I do have hope. My sister was one of the kindest people I know, so it didn't feel like justice when her brain cancer was diagnosed as terminal. It took her more than 2 years to die. She knew it was coming, and there were many tears. But what kept her going was God's presence with her in the operating theatre, throughout chemo, and while she lay paralysed for over a year. Knowing what Jesus endured for her, and the certain hope that beyond death there would be life and joy, an end to suffering, and a new body that would dance again, that hope kept her going. If you're right in the middle of a painful situation yourself, then now is the time to draw near to Jesus, the one who saw suffering from the inside, the one who knows your hurt, and ask him to walk that difficult path with you. He understands. He reached out to the blind man, and he's reaching out to you now. Will you lean in to the one who understands what you're going through? We can't prevent sickness and suffering in the world, but if you found hope in Jesus, then you can offer hope to those around you, hope even today, and hope for eternity. It takes courage to start that conversation, to speak about faith, to invite people to online church. But get this, we don't need to be embarrassed by a remote, uncaring God. A suffering world needs to hear about the God who experienced suffering so that he could free us from it. Who will you reach out to with the truth about the God who suffered? What does Jesus say about sickness for people living through a pandemic? This isn't divine punishment, but perhaps it's a divine opportunity for you to see what Jesus is doing, how he's at work to bring restoration for the whole of creation, how he experienced our suffering so that he could free us from it for eternity.
Before he spoke creation, the God of heaven knew our names. Formed in his reflection, we are his glory on display. And his heart is good, he is always kind. With the cross he moved, he is on our side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. And no matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. We are the Lord's, he will never forsake his own. No. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. His love he lavished on us and called us children of the King. And in his loving kindness, he chose the lowly and the weak. And his heart is good, he is always kind. With the cross he proved, he is on our when the